I think there was an atmosphere that was created where like you don't want to be the person that doesn't work, or like you don't want to be the person that is, oh no, I'm good, because there's so much guilt in organizing where like you have to be working all of the time, or else if this happens to somebody, that's your fault, or oh, if this happens, you weren't there, oh, now we have to, so you're always on go, always saying something.
You already know, it's your girl Naira, and this is Shit Talks. What's good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Shit Talks. I've got a super awesome, amazing, oh my goodness, if I sat here and gassed our guest today, I would be here until the sunset, and then I would have to spend a night and wake up in the morning and keep going. I'm gonna let her tell y'all who she is, but first, what we're talking about today is burnout, specifically as someone who started organizing in your teens, and just what that feels like and how that manifests in your adulthood. So we're gonna get right into it, but first, who are you?
My name's Alycia, everyone. I'm a multidisciplinary artist and freedom fighter from the south side of Chicago, and yeah. That's it. Yeah, I'll just say that.
Beautiful. The list is long.
Right. That's why I'm stopping now.
So tell me, like, what you do for work now. Like, not for work, but like, what do you do now? Like, what do you be up to presently?
Right now, I'm really focused on pursuing arts again. I took a really long break from everything art-wise, from poetry, acting, theater, visual art, and I was really focused in organizing spaces. And so now, besides like a regular 9 to 5, I'm just super focused on just like getting back into that artist journey of mine. So that's what I've been doing.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I also love that for you, especially just knowing like how consuming like existing can be. We forget that like the things that brought us into a lot of these spaces are what we do for fun and like what we do as passions. So that being said, though, who were you when you were 16, right? Like, describe who that person was back then. Let me get a drink of water before you get started.
Alycia at 16, I was very wild. I was very carefree. Sometimes I miss that aspect. I think sometimes our teenage self, sometimes we're like, oh, I was so like this, but I was very carefree at that age. Nothing really, I didn't have really any insecurities about like how I was viewed in the world, but that also put me in positions where like I should have kept my mouth shut sometimes. So I was not as mature in that sense, but I definitely was super like radical to the core, like front of the protest, yelling in everybody's face, and that was a moment, that was a time, but I've definitely have just been, because of life experience, have matured, but I still kind of keep that 16-year-old fire inside of me sometimes when it's needed.
Yeah.
And she was a moment at
Yeah,
that time.
that is so
I
real.
appreciate her.
The carefreeness is real because I was doing any and everything. I did not care, not afraid of anything. It's like how toddlers, like, you ain't never fell and bust your ass before, so you don't really care about, like, the possibility of busting your ass. Yeah, that's real. So when did you start doing organizing work?
So I started through poetry, actually. I did for young struggling authors. I did like a lot of their poetry programming, and through that, I've always naturally written about like, I wouldn't say social justice, but I just wrote about my identity as a Black woman, and that's kind of like inherently I'm speaking to a lot of different movement work based kind of ideas. And I would perform for the competition, but of course, you know, everybody in the city would come to stuff. And so people would see the poems I would do, and they would ask me to perform at like different actions or events. So I started going to events by doing poetry, which was like very fun for me. I've never really gone to like, the big protest I went to was of course like when Donald Trump, and that was kind of like my experience of like being downtown, and we shut downtown. It was like streets blocked off, and so that really kind of like riled me up. So when I was going to more actions to do poetry, I kind of just felt, I don't know, it felt kind of like at home, like to be around people who were caring about the same topics that I was caring about, and also taking it from like an artistic lens too, by doing poetry, dance, whatever the case may be. So I got into organizing work through poetry because that was kind of like my entryway through the door for that.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's really interesting to think about too, because I feel like a lot of artists and a lot of like poets, especially here in Chicago, are quite radical.
Yeah.
I feel like, I mean, you know, art is expression, right? And so I feel like the people who want to express the most are also the people who are like the hell is going on in this motherfucker?
Right.
Like, what is actually going on? So that's very real. I also didn't know that's exactly how it started. So that's interesting. So do you feel like you talked about being in the front and, you know, yelling in people's faces and being like super active and super carefree? Do you also feel like folks adultified you at all in these organizing spaces?
Absolutely.
Yeah. As a Black woman.
Let me also add that one in too.
Yeah.
I think it's natural. I think in any space where you are younger or the youngest, and there are people who are years older than you, and it's kind of like that dynamic of like leader and follower, adultification always happens. I think that, adultification has always happened. I think even if it's not intentional, I think sometimes people don't know how to create spaces where there's actually a healthy dynamic for older people to actually give space to younger people to grow, to make mistakes. A lot of it is very much so like, youth in the front, and that's the picture, but really it's 20 million adults behind you telling you what to do, or not letting you do certain things, or putting you in dangerous positions because they know that you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, but they know what's going on.
They know what's going on, so they're going to do it because they want the young person that's like ready to go, isn't going to ask any questions. They want to, you know, especially when we're younger at that age, even just in life in general, we always want to be, I can do it. No, I can do it the best. Like, I don't need rest. I don't need to say no to stuff. And adults who know that youth are the faces that are going to make people care about something, they're like, oh, like, you want to keep going?
Go.
Don't take any breaks?
Yeah.
No, go. Like, you do
Literally.
it. So I definitely think that does happen, even if it's not on, like, the adults are being, like, evil and they're trying to, like, plan stuff.
Yeah.
I just think it happens unintentionally or intentionally in a lot of spaces.
That's so real. I also feel like, you know, the interesting thing about not only, like, considering like the art scene, but also even the organizing space is that like you can know a person is like young, but like maybe you don't even know exactly
How
like
old they
exactly.
are,
You might be like exactly, and people might not even take the time to ask. Like you might be like, I thought you was 24 this whole time. Like the whole time that person exactly
like,
still in high school.
Why did you think that?
Exactly. Like what do you mean? That's so real. So how do you think like organizing or starting organizing at a young age impacted the way you viewed the world? Like I feel like in my adulthood, I've had to rediscover optimism because I was just like, you know, being surrounded like mentally by like the circumstances of things makes you be like, the world is a dark chasm that needs to like die by fire.
Yeah, I definitely think that starting so young, you know, like I said, it's that joy and that's fire that's in you at that point because you're so young. You're like, I want to protest here and go here. And it also makes you just never stop because you are so young and you do feel like I can just do this every single day. And I think now being older and also just looking back at stuff, I'm just like, wow, it took me so long to, one, recover from the years of organizing at that young age. And it also kind of makes you lose a bit of yourself. Like this past year, I just kind of took a break from life and everything. And I had to like rehumanize myself because organizing work at that young age definitely like dehumanized me in multiple different ways. I lost a really big chunk of who Alycia was outside of organizing. And it was always this detachment of like, Alycia the organizer or Alycia the activist. Even I would go to events and spaces and if people would see me there, mind you, I could just be going to an action. They would see me, oh, and we're gonna have Alycia come and speak. Or Alycia come and perform. And I'm like, I didn't really ask.
I was actually just walking past.
I didn't really ask to do any of that, but
like,
sure. But it definitely, I would agree with what you're saying. Working for so long, and especially in Chicago, and I think, you know, 2016 to like 2020, 2021, it was a lot of L's, a lot of losses, a lot of just kind of like defeat. And we didn't really all the time see like triumph in a way of like, okay, like I can rest and be okay. It was like, okay, we got this one little thing, but now it's months of having to be back out. So it definitely makes you feel defeated, makes you feel very like hopeless and like cynical in a kind of a way. And like having to overcome that and take that break and not be in the lane of an organizer of, oh, well, I have to figure this problem out and fight this. And the whole time, like, you're not even taking care of yourself or your mental. So I definitely agree with you on now looking back and being older, I really have had to detach the organizer and just become like Alycia again, which I think was something I was losing doing organizing work at such a young age, because that just becomes an identity and people identify you as that and they don't separate that from you as well. So it's hard to do that yourself.
Yeah, that's so real. But that's so real. That's very real. And I think that sucks, especially because when you're at that age, you're still finding yourself. And it's hard to actually find yourself when people are like telling you who you are.
What you are, who you are.
Exactly. Right. What you're going to do, what it is that you are important for, like why you are important in their opinion. And I think that like, it's not as if, you know, you were forced to do organizing work. Like that was a part of your identity, but it's like, okay, but is this the only thing that I am or the only reason why folks like find value in the work that I'm doing? It was also weird for me that like at a point in time, folks didn't know that I made art. Like folks didn't know that I was like a poet. Like it would like the only gigs I would get hired for a stretch of time was like, come speak at this thing or do this panel. And I was like, y'all don't need a little poem or something?
Right, y'all want
I recently told someone that I like creative I was like, oh yeah, I can creative direct your music video. And he was like,
I thought you just spoke it.
He's like, what do you know about that? I was like, I have a film degree. Yeah. Exactly. So that's very real. So you talked about taking that time off recently. Do you feel burnt out? Like, why do you feel like you need to take that time off?
Absolutely. I felt extremely burnt out. I was very just like, and I'm somebody where life has to literally, you know, like the tower card in tarot, like life literally just has to like crumble and fall apart. Because I will say yes to everything, especially at that age. I was still very much so trying to, I don't know, I was being adultified by people, and then also I think because of that, I was also like adultifying myself.
Trying to live up to this.
I was like, okay, like everyone wants me to act like this, so I'm gonna act like this all the time. I'm gonna say yes, I'll be a leader, yes, I'll do this. You know, I think all the time, like 16, 21, and in all the spaces I've been in, I've never been a young person. I've always been somebody that's leading this, teaching this, facilitating this, leader of this thing. And I'm just like, dang, like, can I sit on the other side for once and be the person that's receiving the information? So I definitely was extremely burnt out. Every space I was in. And to my own fault, I'm never somebody that can't take accountability. There are times where I could have been like, no, I can't do this. But I think there was an atmosphere that was created where like, you don't want to be the person that doesn't work. Or like, you don't want to be the person that is, oh no, I'm good. Because there's so much guilt in organizing where like, you have to be working all of the time, or else if this happens to somebody, that's your fault. Or, oh, if this happens, you weren't there. Oh, now we have to, so you're always on go, always saying something. And so for me, people talk about like, oh, you have to make sure you're resting, take a nap. If I'm waking up and I got the same schedule the next day, that's not, the nap yesterday's not helping me. So I think I was extremely burnt out. And that's why I just needed that break. And it was like a year and a half. Like, I'll run into people now and they're like, Alycia, like, where have you been? Like, off the grid, I had to take that break for myself. Because if I was, I don't think I would have ever stopped saying yes to stuff. I would always been like, yeah, I can do this. Yeah, I can be here. And sometimes the biggest way to cure yourself from that is to literally stop multiple things that's happening in your life so you can actually rest and take that time. Because taking a couple days off, that's not going to help if your everyday schedule is work. So I was incredibly burnt out after I was done from like, 16 to 21. That's like 2016, 2017 to 2021, 2022. Yeah, I needed that break.
No, that's so real. That's so real. And that guilt is insane. I remember being away at school because I graduated high school in 2016. And so I went away to school and I wasn't here when Trump got elected. I wasn't here when, like footage was getting released. I wasn't here like when all those things were happening. I'm seeing like, people I know like getting rocked in the streets or whatever the case is, or like, and I was like, damn, like I feel so like, it made me like depressed. I felt so useless. And it's like, you're trying to get a degree, like, like you, and I was so broke. I was like, I can't even get your Greyhound bus back to the city. Anybody can drive me back to the city, man. Like,
right, it's like, what can you actually do in that moment?
Exactly. Right? I was like, I got $5 towards the movement, y'all. I can't even make it back. And it's like, what are you talking about? Like, That doesn't make you useless. That doesn't
Yeah.
make you. But I mean, there's also people who will turn around and be like, "Where the hell were you at?" And it's like, I'm so sorry that I
And
wasn't
there are
there.
those people
Yeah.
who will do that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that's very real. I'm also very happy that you've taken that time. I
Yes,
think that
thank
like
you.
our bodies, you know, isn't there a book called Our Bodies Keep the Score? Is that what it's called?
Trauma keeps this
Something
something
like
like that.
something like that, yeah.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. And that's so real. Like, you're glowing, you know what I'm saying? It's
Thank you.
it's literally these like years in our life, like the decisions that we make at this time that impact the life that we live when we're older, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I have like migraines or whatever the case is because of like concussions that I've had or whatever the case is.
Right.
It's like we have to pay attention to the way that we manage our bodies and like care for
Yeah.
ourselves so that we're not dealing with it 30 years down the line. So
Yep.
it takes people time to figure out. So I'm very happy that,
thank you.
you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? You've gotten to that place. So I want to ask, do you think mentally it's healthy for folks to start organizing at a young age? Like, what's the middle ground?
I don't ever want to say that it's not healthy because I do believe a lot of our leaders, when we look back, like when we talk about the Black Panthers, they were all very young.
Young as hell.
And, you know, I always think like, I'm very grateful to them for when they started at their age. And I just think that, like you said, like what's a middle ground? I do think that there are certain things that I don't want to, because again, I think ageism and adultification was something that was very like present in a lot of spaces when I was coming up. But I do think for me to be so young and for me to have gotten the amount of responsibilities that I had, or like what you had to do as a youth organizer, can definitely be very taxing. And I think that there should be something that's like, okay, young people, we should be doing X, Y, and Z, but like, don't expect us to do the rest of the alphabet for you.
Yeah.
Like, don't expect us to do everything
you got
else.
The other,
like,
what, 23?
have us come here, you know, especially, you know, if we aren't getting like, I always think for me, I would be in school and then I would be for the rest of the night at a bunch of actions. Not really enough time to do homework for real.
Yeah.
And I'm like a sophomore, junior in high school. And so there's a lot of just like dynamic in terms of the time that I have to still be a young person that I feel like does age you. And by like 19, I felt grown as hell. I was like, I'm 19. I've been organizing for this many years. I be out at midnight at City Hall. Like, that's been my life for a couple years at this point. So I do think that there should be a middle ground because I don't think that we should put so much responsibility on young people, especially when older people, and even like the age that I'm at now, like young adult, I don't know what 22 would be classified as. I don't know what
confusing.
that is. It's a confusing time.
time.
But I feel like there's stuff that like we can do that can take the load off of younger people, especially, you know, if we're out of college, if we're not like working super hard, you know, there's stuff that we can do to help. And I feel like coming up, we didn't have that help all the time. It was like, oh, you're an organizer. I don't care if you're 15, you're going to lead this march.
Yeah.
You're going to lead this action. You're going to lead this, whatever it is. So I do think that there should be a middle ground because, I don't know, I feel like everybody I know who started organizing young is always like, I just wish we had more breaks.
Yeah.
I just wish everything wasn't so stressful. So I definitely think that there should be people and like younger adults or adults who are in these spaces that make sure that kids don't feel like they're growing up too fast while doing organizing work.
That's real.
Yeah.
And to also give like insight, obviously not to infantilize folks, but to just be like, you know, if you would like my advice, like, I think you should go home. Like, there have been times where like, you know, we were outside and I was like, it's okay if you go home.
If you want to leave, you can.
Yeah, like, I'll call you an Uber. Like, you should go home. Like, that's okay. I also, and I know that it's like hard for folks to maybe figure out like, okay, well, how do I like show support or take some of that weight off of young people? And it's simply just being like, you don't have to figure out everything on your own. Like, we are actually here like to help and not just to be like, you are the poster child for the movement.
Exactly.
I'm going to stand back here or sit in my car. Like,
and telling them like, no, it's okay to take a break. I wish when I was younger, I got told, Alycia, don't do this action today. Alycia, you don't have to write this. Alycia, don't do this. I got told, list of things to do. And I think that if I had somebody who was even a few years older than me, that's like, Alycia, don't worry about this. Alycia, worry about a college application. Alycia, do this. Worry about something that is like,
come on.
worry about something else. So I think that that's also something like just telling them, you don't have to do this.
Yeah.
Go have fun.
Yeah.
Go to homecoming.
You don't have to.
Like,
yeah,
go do fun stuff. Like,
yeah. No, that's so real. That's very real. Also, like, you know, I remember having somebody pull up to an action and being like, oh, it's good to see you here. They're like, I'm here to make sure you have a ride home. I was like,
right.
Damn,
it's like,
thank
okay,
you.
Like,
I was like, thank you. Like, I appreciate that. That's so real. Yeah, I don't think that young people shouldn't organize. I just think that that support is like what changes, you know, the load that's on folks' shoulders.
Yeah.
So how have you reimagined how you show up in organizing spaces?
I definitely have kind of taken, not control, but I've definitely understood what I'm able to do and what I'm not able to do anymore, just in terms of like capacity wise. I'm just not like, also too, because of just like traumatic experiences that I've experienced from organizing work, I can't do like protests and actions and like being like in the streets of downtown. I just went through a lot. Like I can't relive a lot of those moments. And at first, like when I would tell people, oh, like I don't really feel like popping out to this, and I would feel bad, I'm just like, no, like some of y'all wasn't there when shit went down. Like I don't feel comfortable being in those spaces anymore. And not making myself feel bad about that, because there's stuff that like I would never, and I think this is something that people bring up too, like everybody has their role when we do organizing work. And I feel like people say that, but they don't mean it for real when it comes to actually making sure that people feel comfortable doing work.
Yeah.
And so like a lot of those spaces I just don't go to. I love going to like community events and community gatherings, because I feel like that's something that I personally missed out on, was actual like community building and organizing spaces. I feel like we were so focused on actions, rallies, oh, let's do this, protest this, that like, I don't know, like I didn't really leave with a community of folks now that I don't do that level of organizing work. So I'm really focused on like building community, because I think that that's also important. We saw after 2020, like after everything kind of went down, people don't really care too much anymore. And I think that's because a lot of it was we were so focused on like actions, doing this, that you could have 1,000 people at an action and you don't know anybody's name. And you leave like not knowing anybody that you was just standing next to, chanting and cheering with. So I think now I'm really big on like, we're gonna do an event, a screening, a artist workshop, a collage, something where like you can leave an event and you're like, I just left knowing 5 more people that I can call, that's like-minded, that I know is a friend that I can trust, a community member that I can trust. So doing that, and then also I've always really been really big for mutual aid work, because I also feel like that is a really big backbone that I feel like when we were doing a lot of our like actions and protests, we were always like, okay, but we need to make sure that we have this, so that way people are fed, people are good, people have resources to get home, people know that they can reach out to us if they need something in the future. So community building and mutual aid work are like 2 of kind of like the lanes that I've kind of like put myself in now that I am doing organizing work again, but doing it in a way that's not like re-traumatizing myself, because I have to respect my body. Yeah.
That is so real. I like agree with that so much, and I think that those components are so important to the movement or the work as well. It's not just like standing outside, you know, which is still important too. And at that time, exactly. And at that time, that was your job.
Me. Like,
exactly, that was your role. That was your role. And
yeah.
I feel similarly, like, I got injured in a way that like has progressively impacted me, but I'm like, I still not even want to feel, I still think that this work is very important, whatever that is, and like how can I use what it is that I enjoy? Because now that thing is not enjoyable. Because there's a sense of like, I did enjoy protesting. Like I did enjoy that type of work, even though it was hard and even though it was not fun. I'm not here for fun, but it's like, I feel equipped to do this. And now that has changed. That's the word,
right? It's equipped. Exactly. Like, I can do this.
Exactly. I can do this, and I'm willing to. And I can, and I can do something else.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? I can work at a little newspaper.
Right.
I can, you know what I'm saying?
Make sure everything's right.
Exactly. Yeah. Community builder is literally my title at Southside Weekly, because I'm just like, how do we And I'm keeping that in the back of my mind because I'm like,
Okay.
wait a minute,
Yeah,
that's
wait a
kinda, you know what I'm
minute.
saying? I might have to chop it up with you. But that work is still important. It
Yeah.
also is kind of, sometimes can be disheartening to see that, like, I think the adrenaline that comes from protesting is very, like, addictive.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
everybody outside for this thing, but, like, who is at the vigil?
That's something else.
Yeah, who is at the vigil? Who is at the food
Listen,
drive? Who is
yeah.
at,
Yeah.
like, you know what I'm saying? Who is, like, what other ways are we servicing the communities that we are
Yeah.
organizing for and around?
And as somebody who was at a lot of those
Yeah.
all the time, I would see the difference in crowds.
Mhm.
That's why I'm always just like, you can protest forever, but like, what's gonna happen after?
Yeah.
Like when the people that you're protesting for are now trying to raise money to do whatever or trying to do some community event, are you going to that too?
Yeah.
Like it's just being all around. That I'm sorry, let me.
No.
But yeah.
No, that's okay.
Because yeah.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's very real. We can talk about it. 'Cause
Right.
It's, yeah. And that's no offense to people. I understand the frame of mind that makes people organize the, like, importance and value
Yeah.
in that way. It's the fact that, like, you know, you want to feel like you're a part of something and maybe you don't see passing out groceries as riveting, but I
Something, but
promise.
You can make it fun.
Yes, you can make it because we be
anything fun,
turned.
right?
We
We
be turned.
can make
We be
anything
turned.
fun.
The Pampers be getting passed out and we be turned. So yeah, I just implore people to think about it that way too. Like, just think about what it is that you are also passionate about and what you can do to add to the movement in other ways as well. And like, literally don't kill yourself thinking you can only protest.
Thing, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's beautiful. So, has there ever been a time where you were like, why am I doing this?
After summer 2020, and it was like going into 2021. After that summer, and I think what felt like was about to be like something, I think because everybody who was on the front line experienced something like incredibly traumatic, we all kind of had to take a step back. And I think at that part, I was just very like hopeless. Winter kicked in, everybody's kind of like isolated. We were still doing like mutual aid work, but 1,000 people out of action turned into 10 people. You couldn't get nobody to come outside after that summer. And it was just very hard, especially, you know, being there pre-2020 and seeing that it was the same numbers after that summer. People were not coming to stuff unless it was like something that was super big. But seeing the numbers just drop like that and people coming to the understanding that people are like, okay, that was fun.
Yeah, back to my
Now we can go outside and go eat and go do this because I think and the pandemic's done. Yay! Like everything's done. I don't really care about protesting anymore. So I think when that happened, it was like, okay, we lost numbers. People weren't coming to stuff anymore. You couldn't really get people to come out no matter like what you did, and people just didn't think that it was cool. Like uprisings made organizing cool and niche, and I'm gonna make my sign and post my black square on Instagram and make everybody feel good and happy.
The quickest way to get blocked.
The quickest way to get blocked. I was like, what is, don't tag me in this. Like, I'm not gonna post this with you. Like, what are you talking about? And so after that all happened, I was just like very depressed. It kind of just felt like, okay, back at square one. And that was when the start of like the burnout really kicked in. It's like, okay, like we just did all this work, all these actions, everyone's making these orgs, making these coalitions, everybody gets messed up that summer. And now it's like, okay, well, we're defeated. Like now, so I would say that is the point where it just really felt like years and years and years, we get to this climax, it doesn't really work the way we thought it would. And now it's like, okay, now organizing is not fun. Now it's not cool. Now everybody who was attracting and bringing people to these spaces have also abandoned those spaces and don't circulate in those rooms anymore. Now we're like, now organizing is like boring again. And people who have been doing that work are back to just like being like, I don't know, kind of just left without any hope that, and it honestly still has not really kicked back up since then.
Yeah. That's so real. And also like, we experienced this really interesting anomaly where people were opening their pocketbooks and pouring money like on the movement, which granted, you know, not always like, it didn't fix everything, but it was very helpful to be like, we need to raise mutual aid funds. And like folks were like, yeah, exactly. And we're throwing it. And, you know, as, you know, someone who like we started doing, because I was like, how am I supposed to redistribute all this money? Let me gather a couple friends and like try and see if we can, you know what I'm saying, if we can get some help to do this. And it just got so hard for us to, after that, continue to store that, but people still needed bread. Like people were still hitting us and being like, do y'all have any money? Yeah. And we're like, no one
cares anymore.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No one cares anymore. And like, I mean, yeah, and people started, you know, like being a little fraudulent as well. But like,
got a little shaky after that summer.
It also got a little shaky too. But like, yeah, I was like, sorry, nobody cares anymore.
I guess Black lives don't matter anymore.
I guess they don't. Yeah,
the summer's done.
Exactly, and so
over with.
I'm sorry if you didn't get your fridge this summer. You're not gonna get it.
I don't know. Like,
I cannot help you.
That's literally what. That is exactly what that felt like.
Yeah.
Everyone stopped giving money. Nobody cared, and it was like, yeah, okay.
Now also babies don't need Pampers. Like what happened?
Babies are still being born.
Exactly,
like...
they're still being born, and they still don't have no money.
Yeah.
And so that's super disheartening too, because it's like, you don't want to give up, you know, you don't want to give up, but it's like, what am I supposed to do? I literally cannot like push this train on my own.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask, how have you continued to protect yourself through like self-care? Like, what are some things that you do? You talked about re-entering the artistic space as well.
I think, you know, I mentioned earlier, doing organizing work for so long, you end up losing a big part of yourself. And I was just very lost. I didn't really know who Alycia was, what I was supposed to be doing. I also felt like there were times where I wanted to get back into a lot of art spaces, but I felt like because I took such a big break from them, oh, like I can't start acting now. You know, I could have went to school for acting. I didn't go for a lot of other reasons. The pandemic helped to like stop that, but then, you know, I didn't really get told to consider going to school because I was organizing. So I was doing a lot of stuff. So I think that, you know, taking that break and finding the time to re-find out who Alycia was and who I am now being older and what that means for me has just been very helpful. So getting back into arts, I mean, like I paint, I make jewelry, like, you know.
Did you make these earrings?
I make the earrings.
So
I don't know.
cute.
Like, I make the earrings. Like,
I've been looking at them this whole time. They're so cute.
So getting back into that has just been super helpful because, you know, like I'm sure you know, like we mentioned earlier, like when everyone's expecting you to work, when do you have time to write that poem that's not for an event? Mm-hmm. When do you have time to write that poem that's not, I'm going to go to this action? Like I used to have poems where I just didn't write anything else unless I knew I could go to an action and hear some snaps. Yeah. And I feel like that's just so bad. Mm-hmm. Like that's so toxic of a way to view creating art is, okay, I know I might go somewhere and they might ask me to perform, so let me not make a poem that's good to me, but a poem that I know is performance ready. Yeah. That's just not a natural way of creating stuff. So I think being able to take that break from organizing, from just like any expectations that's not like, are my bills paid? Mm-hmm. Can I live comfortably? Okay, that's all I need to do. Yeah. I don't need to do anything else. Yeah. I'm gonna lay down. I'm gonna lay down. I'm gonna lay down today. I'm gonna take 2 hours to make some stuff. So I think that taking that break, like literally forcing myself to not go to stuff and then having that time to get back into art, I think is very important because my art was all about organizing, social justice, movement work. And I think naturally, like I said, I've always kind of written in that way or talked in that way or made stuff in that way, but it wasn't for this. It just so happened to be, oh, I can write something about this, I can make this. But when it turned into everything I was doing was this. And like, I think that's great, that's beautiful. But when it's not coming from a passion of I want to do this versus I have to do this, kind of loses that touch. So getting back into that space of creating art that's for me, that also just so happens to work for a movement space has been very important.
That's very real. And I think especially like the culture of slam poetry also like adds to that, added to that a lot too. Yes. But yeah, I started writing silly poems, like funny poems. And
funny poems.
Exactly. I'm just like, I want to talk about, I want to laugh, I want to giggle or whatever the case is. That doesn't mean that the work that I was creating before wasn't important, but like, what type of work do I actually like making, regardless of if niggas think it's funny or cool.
Exactly.
And I recently got asked to do a poem or some poetry in a social justice space. Like I'm performing later this month, and I had to like dig in the archives a little. Thank you. I had to dig in the archives a little bit. I was like, wait, I ain't wrote a poem like this in a while. Like
this way, hold on.
I was like, let me go scroll back in my notes.
Yes.
I was like,
yeah.
And yeah, I was like, okay, I'm not mad at that. I'm not mad at that at all. What does folks supporting you feel like? Like, what does actual support feel like?
I think now that I have rediscovered what I kind of like want to do in this world, I think before support was like, oh, you're not coming to this action, then like you don't love me, you don't like Black lives. Like obviously being very dramatic. But I think I was always like conflating support for the movement with like myself. And sometimes if people came to an action and I'm going home and I don't have any food to eat, I'd be like, okay, like, you came to that, but I'm coming home to nothing.
Yeah.
And I just feel like something should be fixed about this. So I think now supporting me as somebody who has created a healthy boundary between doing organizing work, but then also making sure that Alycia is happy and living and thriving and feels supported, supporting the work that I do. So, like, I run a collective that's called Undoing Our Erasure. That's been running since like 2020, and I do like different events, but like kind of like artist events or like fun events, so like stuff like that, or even just like I'm a poet, I make art, supporting that, and I think that that's how I feel good. Like I had a show a couple months ago, and people came to that. I was like, wow, like that's cool.
Yeah.
People came and they saw my art. I didn't have to do a long speech or put together a big presentation for people to say, oh, Alycia, thank you for your work. I think that when you do organizing work, it's not for you, but like it takes a lot of energy to like put presentations together, put work together, and you're just doing it, and no one's being like, you're doing a good job.
Yeah.
So I think now hearing you're doing a good job when it's stuff that I have a personal connection to is just like the biggest form of support for me. Yeah. Like say that I'm doing a good job because you like this painting that I made or you like this poem that wasn't me screaming and crying about the pain that I've suffered. So I think supporting Alycia in what I do and not, oh, you did this presentation, that's cool that you do that. But like just like appreciating my own skills, my own talents, without me having to like put on a show for you to appreciate it.
And I think it's hard to express that because you don't want to tell people that you want them to appreciate you, but it would be nice if they did.
Right.
I don't want to tell you that you should say thank you. But you should though.
Right.
Like, you know, and I will say thank you.
No,
like you've
thank
done a lot
you,
of
thank
amazing
you.
you've done a lot of amazing work, and I like
you.
look up to you in that way in many ways as like an artist and as a poet, but like it's also just crazy because like when I heard you do poetry, I was like, are you a theater kid? I was like, there's something so like the artistry behind this, like these words, like what you're saying is also amazing. But I was like, why do I feel like you can sing? Like, or whatever the case is. I'm like, you know, and I think that, I just implore people that if they are inspired by or influenced by or just like feel anything as a result of the work that other people are doing, whether it's making art or standing in front of people and speaking, like say thank you. Say thank you. Give them their flowers. Literally. People are always saying that, but nobody ever actually do it. Where the fuck the flowers at?
Right.
Like everybody's always retweeting the tweets, but don't never go buy the flowers.
Right.
So yeah, I just want to say thank you. Yeah. And lastly, but definitely not least, you touched on Undoing Our Erasure. Talk to me about the type of work that y'all are doing and why you created that platform.
Yeah, sure. So I created Undoing Our Erasure in 2020. This is like March, right before everything kind of like blew up. So I did this without even really knowing that stuff was about to happen. Right, the storm was coming. I didn't know. I was prepping for it. Yeah. And that's that intuition. Okay, see? And I made it because a lot of people were talking about the pandemic and how city officials were responding to the pandemic in like Black and brown neighborhoods. So there are a lot of people who before were never talking about, you know, food deserts or, oh, we should be getting money to make sure that people who are in neighborhoods that are most affected. And I was in Auburn Gresham. And at that time we were like one of like the most like highest cases for COVID. So I saw a lot of people also in that community that were speaking out. And I was like, you know, this is work that we've been doing for a couple years. And I know a lot of young people who were kind of getting erased from a lot of those conversations. And everyone's like, oh, let's talk about this. Let's talk about this. And I'm like, I got people who can talk about that. And we can let you know. So Undoing Our Erasure just started off as a podcast. And I brought on like a few people. Who was like one of the first guests? Jalen Kobayashi, shout out to Jalen. Shout out Jalen. I have to shout out Jalen. And so, we would just talk about, not even just about the pandemic, but life as a student organizer, life as being like a young Black person in performing arts spaces, just because I feel like youth at that time are getting erased from a lot of these conversations, and especially younger people who were already working and talking about a lot of this stuff. And then once the uprisings happened, that kind of shifted gears, and I would have loved to talk to people. And sometimes I look back and I'm like, we should have all just been talking or doing something, or not always outside. It would have been good to have moments where we did like sit down and like think and talk about stuff. But once that happened, things shifted, and at that moment, that's when I got into doing education, so programming. So I would make workshops and teach workshops based on a lot of the stuff that was happening. So like letting people know the difference between like reform and abolition, what is doing a lot of like budgeting workshops to talk about like the city's budget at that time. And that kind of became the thing for Undoing Our Erasure, was like radical education, and doing it in a way that's accessible for everybody, where people can leave the space and they feel comfortable enough to say, okay, I went to this workshop, I now know what it means where we're talking about abolition. Or I now know where it means, if I'm not at that point yet, what it looks like to defund the police. And so that then shifted into doing like mutual aid work, because I, at that time, also put together the grocery delivery that Mackenzie Scott, if she ever sees this.
Let's talk about it.
If she ever sees this, was inspired by that and did the whole like donation spree. And I wanted to also bring that into Undoing Our Erasure. So it was still a podcast, but then it grew into education program. Then it grew into a mutual aid program. Then it kind of grew into wanting to spotlight and highlight different community organizers, activists, poets, performers, whatever that case may be, that is literally undoing the erasure that Black people globally have experienced, and movements culturally when it comes to like music and art. How does that kind of look up and appear? And more recently, I've been doing a mutual aid program that is called Radical Essentials for the Youth. And since September of last year, I've been providing like free books and art supplies to students throughout the city of Chicago, and also have brought back the podcast too, which has been super cool. So yeah, a lot of programming that is geared to providing resources to Black people globally, with a focus in Chicago, because period. But a lot of resourcing to Black youth, and just kind of creating a space where people who might have experienced being erased from a conversation, or feel like they don't really have a platform to speak on something, that Undoing Our Erasure is a space to go to, where you're getting mutual aid resourcing, but then also like affirming your existence, because I feel like people need it.
Beautiful. How can folks support Undoing Our Erasure?
Yeah, sure. You can definitely follow us on IG. It is Undoing Our Erasure on Instagram. I recently hosted a movie screening for In Our Mother's Gardens, and then we did a collage workshop. I'm going to be doing another screening then, and it's going to end in like a photo kind of workshop kind of thing. So that's going to be super cool. So if anybody's interested in like going to that event, we're still doing the kits, and I've like also upped the ages for some of them. So that way the youth can also go up to like 25, and there's like books that's catered to kind of like that age demographic. But yeah, just following and supporting the work and coming out. There's going to be like another book club that's going on. I also host like writing workshops. Jalen was hosting like a rap workshop during that. So just follow, because there's going to be events and stuff that I can post about. So yeah, just following Undoing Our.
Period. Yeah. Cool.
Yes.
Well, that's all I've got for you. You are so extremely well spoken, but that's literally a tale as old as time. So thank you for making the time to come on this episode of Shit Talks. That's all I got for y'all. Once again, I'm your host, Naira. This is Alycia. Peace.